So now we're going to start on math. We're on chapter 9, lesson 9. You should be open in your math book to page 613. Now before we start, I want you to imagine that you have 4 quarters. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, imagine that you take one of these quarters and you give it away, or you lose it or something. You don't have it anymore. What fraction of my quarters have I lost? I have lost 1/4, because I have lost, you can't see that. I have lost 1/4, because 1 out of my 4 quarters is gone. Now, what fraction of quarters do I still have left? I have 3/4 of my quarters left. Now we figured that out by looking. We can also figure things out like this by doing multiplication, which is what we're going to do today. This looks like this as a multiplication problem. 3 times 1/4 equals 3/4. Each of these quarters represents 1/4 of all of my quarters. So, if I repeat 1/4 3 times, I have 3/4. Okay, so now we're going to get to the book. I know this is really hard to read, so just make sure that you're following along in your book. Hopefully, if I can get it working at home, I'll have an actual book that I'll be filming, and that'll make it a little easier. So I know this is really hard to see. Hopefully you're in full screen, which will make it a little bit easier. But just make sure that you're listening and following along. So, now we are looking at page 613. And we're going to go ahead, I don't have it up here because I couldn't fit it all, but we're going to go ahead and read the sentence underneath the title in your head while I read out loud. You can use models and equations to multiply a fraction by a whole number. Well, we showed that yesterday. We showed that if we wanted to do 3 times 1/4, we would take a 1/4 tile and we would repeat it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. 3 1/4 tiles is the same as 3/4. Okay, we also saw it like this. 3 times 1/4 equals 3/4. That's what we did yesterday. So now, let's look. Today we're going to do it without models. We're only going to use repeated addition. We'll use a number line a couple times, maybe just once, and then we'll use actual multiplication. So, go ahead, everybody finger or pencil on example 1, and then read in your head while I read out loud. Each card on a trivia game has 6 questions. Each question represents 1/6 of the question on the card. So what that means there is that the whole is the card with the 6 questions. Okay, it's broken up. The whole is the card. It's broken up into 6 questions. So that means each question is 1/6 out of those total 6 questions on that card. Caleb correctly answered 4 of the questions. What fraction of the questions on a card did he answer correctly? So what that means is we have to take the 4 questions he got correct and multiply it by the fraction that each question represents. So we know that he got 4 right. Remember, go ahead and write over top. Just writing it helps you remember. And we're multiplying it by the fraction fraction that each question represents. So we have 4 times 1/6. Now, there are two ways we can do this. We can use repeated addition, which means that we take this 1/6 and we repeat it 4 times, which means we add it 4 times. So 4 times 1/6 would look the same as 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6. So that's 4 times. Now, if we add 1 4 times, we get 1/6 plus 2/6 plus 3/6. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 equals 4/6. But now we're to the point where we have to start simplifying again. We can't leave an answer not in simplest form. Yesterday we were mostly working with improper fractions, and remember, we never simplify improper fractions. But regular fractions or mixed numbers, we do have to simplify the fraction. We know, based on basic facts and patterns, that the greatest common factor of 4 and 6 is 2. So remember, we're writing the division. We're writing how we have to divide the numerator and the denominator, each by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So that means 4/6 in simplest form is 2/3. That means that 4 times 1/6 equals 2/3. Now, there's another way to do this on a number line. I think this is the only time we're going to use the number line, but, just another option for how to do it if you need to. So we have our number line, and we've broken it up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces. So each of those tally marks represents a 6. Each of these tally marks is a multiple of 1/6. We have 1/6 times 1, because we only did it once. We have 1/6 times 2, because we repeated it twice. We have 1/6 times 3, because we repeated it 3 times. And we have 1/6 times 4, because we repeated it 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So we know once we got to 4 times 1/6, we landed on 4/6. So again, we know that 4 times 1/6 equals 4/6. But remember, we have to put it in simplest form, which is 2/3. So that means 4 times 1/6 in simplest form is 2/3. Then, they checked using fraction tiles. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 1/6 tiles, and we have 1, 2 1/3 tiles. They show the exact same amount of space, so that means we were correct. 4 times 1/6 equals 4/6, or in simplest form, 2/3. So those were 2 ways to solve. Using repeated addition, which means we take that fraction and we repeat it the amount of times that the whole number tells us, just like we did over here. We took this fraction 1/4, we repeated it 1, 2, 3 times to get 3/4. Well, here we have 1/6, we repeated it 1, 2, 3, 4 times to get 4/6. Now, in the next example, we're going to look at how to do it with just multiplication. Okay, so now you should be turned to page 614. Again, I know it's hard to see. I tried to fix it, but unfortunately I can't figure out how to fix it. So just make sure that you're listening and following along the best you can. Okay, so before we start, let's go ahead, read that sentence at the top of page 614 in your head while I read it out loud. You can use equations and properties to multiply a fraction by a whole number. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to use regular old multiplication. First, in this example, we're also going to be using the distributive property. Remember, distributive property is where you decompose one number and then you multiply the other one by the parts of the number that you decomposed. So everybody, finger or pencil on example 2, and read in your head while I read out loud. Find 5 times 3/10. Identify the two whole numbers between which the product lies. So that second part, identify the two whole numbers between which the product lies. We haven't really done that yet, but we will go over exactly how to do that when we find the answer. So, step 1, read this sentence right underneath. Think of 3/10 as a multiple of 1/10. Now that's like what we did yesterday and what we did right here. We know that 3/10 as a multiplication problem looks like 3 times 1/10. Because if we repeat a 1/10 tile 3 times, we're going to get 3/10. Now, remember when we first started talking about mixed numbers and we took the wholes and we broke it down into a sum of the whole numbers and the fractions, we always added the whole numbers to the whole numbers and the fractions to the fractions. We grouped them together. So we're going to do the same thing here. 5 times 3/10 looks the same as 5 times 3 times 1/10. So we have that's our problem in distributive properties. So now let's take the two wholes. Which is 5 times 3. That's the associative property where we group them. We started with the distributive property by breaking down, and now we're moving into the associative property by grouping the whole numbers with the whole numbers. Then we put it in parentheses because we have to do that part first. After we multiply the whole numbers, we're going to multiply it by that unit fraction. So we have 5 times 3 times 1/10. Well, 5 times 3 equals 15. We bring down that multiplication sign and that 1/10. Now we can easily say that if we take 1/10 and we repeat it 15 times, we're going to end up with 15/10. Now we can't leave our answer as an improper fraction, so we need to convert this improper fraction into a mixed number. And to do that, we divide the numerator by the denominator. So make sure to the side you have plenty of room. We'll go over here and we'll go ahead and do that division. So when we're dividing the numerator goes inside the bracket and the denominator goes outside of the bracket. Well, we haven't done double-digit division, but we can use basic facts for this very easily. We know that 10 only goes into 15 one time. 1 times 10 is 10. 15 minus 10 is 5. 5 is less than 10, so that means we're done. 15 divided by 10 is 1. Remainder 5. Now we can turn this into a whole number. Remember, the quotient without the remainder is our whole number. The remainder is our numerator. And the denominator stays the same. So now we have 1 and 5/10. Now 5/10 is not in simplest form, and if we have a mixed number or a regular fraction, we have to put it in simplest form. We know, based on basic facts, that the greatest common factor we know that 5 is a factor of 10. If our numerator is a factor of the denominator, then that is automatically the greatest common factor. So, remember to show this division. We're going to divide our fraction, our numerator, and our denominator, each by 5. Don't forget to bring over the whole number, because 1 and 5/10 is not equal to 1/2. It's equal to 1 and 1/2. So that means 5 times 3/10 in simplest form is 1 and 1/2. Now, this part, the product, identify the two whole numbers between which the product lies. Well, we know if we had a number line, and we started at 0, 1, 2, our whole number is 1. So that means it has to come after 1. 1 and 1/2, if we broke each of these up into halves, we would know that 1 and 1/2 was greater than 1. It would be less than 2, otherwise, because 1, our whole number, is less than 2. 1 and 1/2 would be right in between the whole numbers 1 and 2. So to figure that out, just look at your whole number. Whenever you have a mixed number, it's going to come between the whole number part and whatever the next whole number was. So if we had 12 and 49 hundredths, we would know that this number, this mixed number, was between 12 and 13. It does not matter what your fraction part is. Your mixed number is going to be between the whole number part and whatever whole number comes next. Now, let's look at this part down below. We just figured out that the product comes between the whole numbers 1 and 2. Now, let's look at this. This is going to help us when you guys are doing your independent practice and your homework. Look at the product. Look at this improper fraction before we turn it into a mixed number and then simplify it. Read this box right here while I read it out loud. The numerator of the product, which is this 15, is the same as the product of the whole number and the numerator of the fraction. So we took the whole number, which was 5, multiplied it by the numerator of the fraction, and that was the numerator of our improper fraction. That's not a coincidence. That will happen every time that you are multiplying a fraction by a whole number. Now look at this other box. The denominator of the product is the same as the denominator of the fraction. Again, not a coincidence. Every time you multiply a whole number by a fraction by a fraction, your numerator of your product is going to be the same as the product of the whole number and the numerator. Every time that you multiply a whole number by a fraction, the denominator will stay the same. We're going to look at that in this guided practice, and then we're going to do one independent practice problem, and you'll see it still works exactly the same way. Okay, so we just figured out that whenever you're multiplying a fraction by a whole number, the numerator of the product is the same as the product of the whole number and the numerator of the fraction, because we looked and we saw 5 times this numerator of 3 does equal 15, and then we also realized that the denominator of the product is the same as the denominator of the fraction in our factor, which is 10. So we're going to use that to solve these problems. So number 1, the directions for this say multiply. And number 1, we have 5 times 1/8. Well, let's use this to figure it out. If we multiply our whole number by the numerator of our fraction, we get 5 times 1, which equals 5. Then we keep the denominator the same. 8. Well, we know if we take 5 1/8 fraction tiles, we're going to get 5/8. So that works. We're just going to do that every time. We'll save ourselves some time. We're just going to first multiply the whole number by the numerator of the fraction and then keep the denominator the same. Don't forget to simplify. In this case, I have a regular fraction. I don't have an improper fraction. My fraction is already in simplest form. I know this because 5 is prime and it is not a factor of my denominator of 8. So I know that 5/8 is in simplest form. It is not improper. It is not in simplest form. So we're done with number 1. However, we're going to add a quick extra direction because it's what you're going to have to do for the independent practice and the homework. We're going to figure out what two whole numbers this product comes between. Well, if we look for a whole number, we don't have one. So we can imagine that invisible 0. So that means 5/8 comes between 0 and 5. Okay. Now number 2, 4 times 2/3. Let's use that same trick that we learned up here to solve this one. So we're going to take our whole number, which is 4, and we're going to multiply it by the numerator of our fraction. So 4 times 2 equals 8. Now we're going to keep the denominator the same. So we have 8/3. Now, that is an improper fraction. So we need to go over here. You have plenty of room. And we're going to figure out the mixed number. So remember, you take the numerator and you divide it by the denominator. 3 goes into 8 2 times. 2 times 3 is 6. 8 minus 6 is 2. 2 is less than our divisor, so that means 8 divided by 3 is 2, remainder 2. So that means that our improper fraction is equivalent to 2 and 2/3. Our numerator 2 and our denominator 3 are only one number away from each other, so that means it is in simplest form. Now, let's look at what two whole numbers this mixed number comes between. Well, we have a 2, so that means it has to be as our whole number, so that means it has to be between 2 and the next whole number, which is 3. Okay, now we're going to turn the page. We're going to do number, let's not do number 3. Let's do number 4 together. We're going to do number 4 together because the unit fractions you should be able to figure out pretty quickly. Remember, if you get answers that are in improper fractions, you have to turn them into mixed numbers. Don't forget to simplify any non-improper fraction parts. Pay attention though. Some of you are doing this. If it's already a regular fraction, don't try to put it as a mixed number because you can't do that. It's not possible. So pay attention. Make sure it's not a regular fraction already. Go ahead and turn the page to page 615, and we'll do number 4 together. Well, I just said we were going to do number 4 together twice, but I meant number 5. I meant number 5 the whole time. I was just saying the wrong thing because I was looking at this board instead of this. So we're going to do number 5 together, not number 4. We're going to do it the way that we did the guided practice. So we have 4 times 3/4. Well, step 1, we're going to take our whole number and we're going to multiply it by the numerator of our fraction. So 4 times 3 equals 12. Now we're going to keep the denominator the same, which is 4. So we have 12/4. That's an improper fraction, so we do need to fix it. Now, what I want you to do is whenever you're showing your division, I want you to get out a separate sheet of paper and make sure you number it and do that there. So you're going to go to your separate sheet of paper. I'm going to do it here. But you're going to do it on a separate sheet of paper. So right now, get out a separate sheet of paper if you don't already have one out. At the top, write the page numbers, which is pages 615 and 617. And then start with number 4. And then you can go in 1, 2, you can do the rest of them underneath. But you do need to get out your separate sheet of paper. Make sure that the holes are on the left. Write the page numbers at the top in that big empty space, pages 615 and 616. And then start with number 4 to show our division. Well, we know that we divide the numerator by the denominator. 4 goes into 12 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12, and 12 minus 12 is 0. We don't have a remainder, so remember what that means. What that would actually look like if we wrote everything we needed to. For our whole number, we would take the whole number without the remainder, which is 3. For the numerator, we would take the remainder, which is 0, and then our denominator stays the same. So technically, we have 3 and 0/4. But remember, 0/4 is something that we would not write because 0/4 is the same as 0. So we're going to take off that 0/4, and we have the whole number 3. Now, this is where, because the second part of the directions say that you have to say what whole numbers the product lies between. Well, this one doesn't lie between any because it is exactly 3. The product is exactly 3. We couldn't say that it comes between 3 and 4 because it doesn't. It's right on the 3. We could technically say that it lies between 2 and 4, but the answer is that the product is exactly 3. Okay, go ahead, work on the rest of the independent practice. There are word problems, so make sure that you have, when you get to the word problems, make sure you have the equation. Make sure you have the original answer, which is that improper fraction or irregular fraction. If it's improper, make sure you have the mixed number, and then make sure you simplify anything in the end. And don't forget the unit. So that's what you need. When you get to the word problems, you need an equation, you need your original answer, which may be a mixed number, an improper fraction or a regular fraction. If it's an improper fraction, then you need the whole number, the mixed number, the mixed number, and then you need to simplify anything that you have, whether it's a regular fraction or a mixed number, you need to simplify it. Don't forget that whole number when you are simplifying mixed numbers. And then you need the unit. So there are 5 things you need. Now, you're not always going to need that simplest form, but everything else you will need. Okay, go ahead, finish the independent practice, and then you can work on the homework right after, or you can wait until later today. Remember, if you have any questions about this lesson, make sure that you Skype me or you FaceTime me between 1 and 5 p.m. today. I will be available. Okay.